Welcome to The Line. In early August, law enforcement officials raided a compound near Taos and found 11 children in terrible conditions. They also found a body that may be a 3-year-old boy who was taken by his father in Georgia and allegedly brought to New Mexico. This story has dominated the headlines in the past 2 weeks, and our Line panelists are ready to share their reactions to the latest updates. I'm joined at the table this week by Merritt Allen from Vox Optima LLC, Dan Boyd, Capitol Bureau Chief for the Albuquerque Journal, Carolyn Carlson, a reporter for the Weekly Alibi, and Laura Sanchez-Rivey, attorney at Cuddy & McCarthy LLP. Laura, I want to start with you. The courthouse in Taos was evacuated due to threats against the judge over some of the defendants being released on bail. Lots of people very upset about this case. What's the legal context for that decision?
So obviously it's a very shocking and sad situation, and I think a lot of people have a very emotional reaction to that. And we have to consider that the Judge Backus, has a very specific role to play. She has to consider whether the defendants are an actual threat to the public. And from all the facts that were presented to her and the information, even though it's a shocking potential crime, obviously there were very bad conditions for the children who were found there, starving. Obviously, a lot of bad facts involved. The issue is whether they were an actual threat to the public. And as far as we've heard from the information that's been in the media, the only potential threat that we've seen is that there's allegations that the children may have been getting some sort of training to engage in some school shootings. If that's the case, then obviously that's a concern for the public. But it seems to me that the information that was presented to the judge did not rise to the level of a public threat. And that's very different from other situations where there's a violent crime, for example. And we obviously have heard there's a lot of crime in New Mexico in general, but in a lot of those situations, there's a specific criminal component to it that's violent. In this situation, it seemed to be very internal. They were very segregated. They were separated from the public, and they hadn't posed a threat to the public up to that point. So taking all that into consideration, I think the defense counsel made a very credible argument to the judge about it not rising to the level of a public threat and therefore being able to be released on bond.
Is this part of the bail reform that went into place a few years ago here in New Mexico?
So the bail reform had more to do actually with sort of this idea of a revolving door with defendants, and it isn't exactly the same situation. So just to clarify, the one person that was kept in custody and wasn't let out on a signature bond, which is just basically signing for a bond, and if you violate the terms of the bond, then you do end up having to potentially be what is the word? You're basically not rounded up, but you're brought back into custody, and you potentially face payment of the bond if you violate the conditions. The one person that was kept under custody and imposed a higher bond was the person that was charged with a warrant for kidnapping. And so that rise to the level in terms of the judge, ensuring that he needed to stay in custody because of that. And there's also an extradition issue with regard to Georgia. But the other people who were part of the compound, they didn't have a criminal history. They didn't have any other threat. Even though all of the information that we're hearing sounds pretty extreme, there wasn't reason for them to be kept in custody in the same way or required to post a bond the way that the other defendant was.
And there is one woman who is a citizen of Haiti who's being held on a detainer as well with immigration. Merritt, though, even though this is the law, there's a lot of public outcry that people don't like this, that people have been released on bond.
And I think we have to remember, nowhere in the Constitution is there a provision for trial by Facebook. And this story is horrifying. But what struck me when the announcement first came out on Monday is I thought, what was the DA doing? And we saw in today's Albuquerque Journal article, and yesterday the Albuquerque Journal posted her written order, and she pretty much calls out the state, which means the prosecution, the DA, failing to, the allegations were made with no specific evidence, no charges or pending charges are involved right now with the child, the body of the child who was found. And this is just a perfect media storm. And even making it worse, this is sweeps month. August, Nielsen ratings. I mean, so news is all over this, and it's a nationally interesting story. I think what's very important is the children are safe. The children are in CYFD custody, and there are no plans to allow any of the parents any sort of visitation at this time. The child, the body that was found is so badly decomposed that it may take many, many weeks to determine not just identity, but cause of death. And then these other extreme notions, I think we have problems because they're from out of state, they're not white, they're Muslim. So, and we have also competing investigations. The FBI was around there in May. I think another question is the family was squatting on a property. The property owners contacted law enforcement in January and said, please go deal with this. You have our permission to enter our property. And it wasn't until August that actually happened. So I think there are just a lot of unfortunate circumstances that have created this perfect media storm. And I hope New Mexicans will look back and remember that it's important that the children are safe, and we can't hold people for crimes they haven't been charged with yet.
Carolyn, lots of people in the West live off the grid. They choose to. That's what they want for themselves. This is a balance of privacy and safety for children and vulnerable adults in situations like this. What do you think we need to be talking about and thinking about as we continue to follow this story?
Well, New Mexico has a long history of people wanting to live off the grid, people wanting to homeschool their children, people wanting to have those kind of communities. I lived in Torrance County for about 15 years during the 90s, and I think at any given point we had over a dozen compounds. The Heaven's Gate people passed through there. There were militias. There were, white Christian compounds. So I think New Mexico has to come into grips with that history, right? Excuse me. You don't have to go very far, even from the center of Albuquerque, to find people living in compounds off the grid. Pajarito Mesa, the Bernardo area. It's part of New Mexico. But saying that, there were so many mistakes in this case, which caused this furor of people to come out with their torches ready to hang the judge, who.
And law enforcement, as Maren just mentioned, Dan, a lot of people saying, why didn't law enforcement go in sooner? Are we getting the answers that we need on that right now?
I think I haven't been covering the story directly, but from what I've heard, I know the sheriff up there had said that they needed to make sure that they had search warrant, or things in place before they kind of went in too quickly and maybe might have, caused some legal implications in that regard. I do think that this is we're in an era where people want answers right away. They want it on Twitter, they want it, and there's still a lot of facts that haven't, come out in this. I mean, obviously the autopsy for that young boy, things like that. So I do think that needs to be a little patience as this whole process plays out. And obviously, even though they've been released on the signature bond, that these charges are still pending, and there could be additional charges down the road.
And Laura Merritt mentioned, out of state Muslim folks, the national media has really been hitting on that. What do you think about the national coverage?
Well, it's really difficult to watch, and there's just so much. It becomes an echo chamber at some point, for me at least, listening to everything. But I think what's unusual for us is we don't expect it to reach to the level of the national or even international news when something happens in our backyard. And I agree with what Carolyn is saying. I do think that we've had a history of groups wanting to be separate and off the grid and be insular in that way. And it hasn't been, necessarily Muslims, it's been white Christians. And so this is unusual, and it sort of plays into, I think, a lot of the fears that you hear nationally and from some of our political leaders, unfortunately, about extremist Muslims with an agenda and so forth. So this, I think because of that narrative, there's a lot more focus on this. But I think the reality too, and speaking about, on the issue of law enforcement, there's the need to get search warrants, of course. I mean, they want to make sure that they follow the law in anything that they do. But the other issue too is a safety issue. I think that law enforcement also needs to consider whether, rolling in, moving in on them too soon without having more information, maybe more surveillance and more evidence could turn into something like the David Koresh thing, the FBI and Ruby Ridge, where people were actually, there was a loss of life as a result of some of those actions. So they have to be careful. And I think a big part of it is trying to understand, are they just sort of living separately, or is there actual danger involved? And I think based on their surveillance, limited surveillance that they were able to do, there weren't clear indications that there was potentially a loss of life or a threat to any of the children or the people who were there. And it wasn't until they received, actually, my understanding, a tip from the imam in New York City, who's related to some of them. Somehow they were able to get him a note that said that they were starving, and that's really the evidence that allowed them to move in and get a search warrant and do all of that. So it's a complicated issue, and I do think that because we're in a situation where we have a 24-hour news cycle and there's Facebook and everything else, people jump to conclusions, but it's something that I think we need to, the public needs to take a step back and let the legal system play itself out, the justice system, and especially for that judge. I mean, she's in a difficult position. Certainly didn't ask for her, to be in that role of having to consider, but all she can do is consider the evidence in front of her. And if the state really didn't have anything solid, or it wasn't even at the point where they had charges, there's only so much she can do at that point, and you have to balance those liberties.
Absolutely. Merritt, I have been really interested in kind of the revisiting some of the lessons from Ruby Ridge, from the Branch Davidians in Waco in the past year. Do you think that it's changed how law enforcement and maybe even how the public looks at these kinds of situations?
Well, I think also that's possible. And also, though, something that I think we're seeing, it seems like every week there's a new SWAT situation in Albuquerque with BCSO or APD. So we kind of expect law enforcement to come in with guns blazing at all times. Well, Taos is a lot smaller. Taos has a much smaller police department, they have a much smaller prosecution, a district attorney's office. So what they're able to get done, obviously they've known about this. We know the FBI has been around. I think Laura's point about being careful, preventing loss of life. Once they were able to come up with something concrete, child endangerment, they went in, they got the kids out, the kids are safe. I think everyone is impatient because of what appears to be more emerging horror out of this situation, out of this compound. But as everyone at the table has said, we need to have some patience and let the investigation play out, because I think this will continue to grow.
Carolyn, what are some other questions you have right now that are not answered?
I guess I don't have any unanswered questions. I mean, I think the coverage that's come out has been pretty thorough as what has been released. I guess one of the points I did kind of want to make was, as far as the guns and the kids learning how to use guns, you have to be 11 years old and you can go take hunter safety. So, at 11 years old, you can be trained to shoot a gun. So, it seems to me the public's reaction was a little, like Laura says, was a little harsh because of all these different factors, and we're forgetting that you can, 11-year-old can learn how to shoot a gun under the law.
Yeah. Do you think that the coverage, the local coverage, has had a different tone than the national coverage on this case?
I think so. Yeah.
How so?
I think the national coverage is just really propagating the fear and the ethnicity and the child abuse and just that whole thing. They're just really, really hyping that up for fear. They're forgetting that Christian Scientists, they pray over their children, and sometimes they die. So, I think, and it's hard for the local media to not kind of see that and then see what, the people coming with the pitchforks, basically. So, the Taos News people, I think, have done a good job, being on the ground, in the community, balancing all that coming in on a community that is incredibly eclectic, with people who go there to be different.
Exactly. Well, we'll end it there, and we'll put up some links to that Taos News coverage on our website. When we come back to the line, we'll look at what's new this week in New Mexico politics.